Spinning Wheels, where we are 22 episodes into telling some of the most entertaining motorsport stories certainly I've ever heard. And I'd hazard a guess that despite being in the cockpit for some of them, Guy Smith, you've been equally entertained by the adventures and the intrigue that we've unearthed so far.
Yeah, it's been a really sort of fascinating sort of ride. Getting to catch up with sort of all the stars from motorsport, from racing to rallying to karting, to behind the scenes. It's been really, really good. And just kind of, listen to the stories, which, of their careers and how they've got to where they are currently. It's kind of kept us sane through lockdown, hasn't it? Or certainly lockdown 1. We're now in lockdown 2, and here we are again. But I think people are enjoying it, and that's certainly the aim of the game. So yeah, it's been.
We might actually do it in the same room one day.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, previously on Spinning Wheels, we were joined by an unassuming Welshman who could just become the first British WRC champion since Richard Burns, who sadly left us 15 years ago, almost to the day as we record this. I'm, of course, talking about Elfyn Evans way back in episode 4. We then followed that with legendary WRC co-driver Nicky Grist. Now, the careers of both of these stars is heavily intertwined with the destiny of our next guest. History may well forget Matty Wilson when it's celebrating podiums and world championships, but if it's records you're after, how about the youngest ever driver to win a British Rally Championship round, or the youngest ever driver to win a stage of the WRC? Matthew competed in one of the most competitive eras of the World Championship, that certainly in my lifetime, switching his focus after that to the family business M Sport, of course, and heading up one of the most successful GT racing campaigns with the Bentley Continental GT3, of course, some links there with Guy. Matt, welcome to Spinning Wheels. I should imagine with a newborn baby in the house, it's even more hectic now than when you were swanning around the world driving WRC cars.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. Yeah, it is. I was just saying, we were saying before, just what did you do with all that spare time that you had before, to be honest? And things are good though. Can't complain. She's 8 weeks old now, so lacking on the sleep front, but other than that, it's all good.
Now, I think of you first and foremost as a rally driver because that's how I've known you over the years. But actually, you started way back when in T-cars, didn't you? In these kind of Mondeo Silhouette series for junior touring car drivers.
Yeah, so that was the start of it all. I mean, unlike Guy and a lot of the guys you've had on, I never really did any karting or anything, which probably quite strange considering, Rowra's literally 10, 15 minutes away from the house. So first competitive thing was T-cars. I'd driven around the fields of home since I was, I think, 7 years old. There's probably another story to that actually, which we could come to. But literally T-cars was the first competitive thing I did, and it was a brilliant grounding. I mean, like a great way to learn. You're in proper cars. I think they were like limited to 120 mile an hour, which at 14-year-old was pretty good.
And you were up against people like Wilson and Jolyon Palmer, people like that, weren't you?
Yeah, so there's quite a few guys in there. Tom Chilton, Tom Onslow Cole, who just got made a good career in GTs. People like that. Yeah, even I think Tom's brother Max came through just as I was leaving. So there's quite a few names that have come through it. And then obviously after 2 years of that, moved into a year of Formula Renault. And I did a year with Manor Motorsport, which was actually a hell of an experience because Lewis Hamilton was in the team as well. So there was myself, Lewis, Fabian Coulthard, and a Brazilian guy called Sergio Jimenez. So it was a real incredible year for Renault. I mean, there was Mike Conway, James Rossiter, obviously Lewis, Fabian, Alex Lloyd. There was it was probably one of the most competitive years of Renault as well. So probably been in the wrong place at the wrong time a lot of times, really.
Yeah, some big names all the way through, haven't you?
Yeah, pretty much. But real good grounding. I mean, the racing stuff was a brilliant grounding. I mean, especially Formula Renault. I think it taught me a hell of a lot before I at 16-year-old, before I then ventured on to the stages really.
So tell us then about the driving around the family grounds. Then we've got to go back to
well, it was quite funny. We had my dad had bought an old Mark II Escort. I think it was for like 20 quid, I think, an old brown Mark II Escort, and it was sat there, and the whole idea was that was what I would learn to drive in. Well, he just didn't really have the most time at that point. It was a busy point of sort of Malcolm Wilson Motorsport time before it became M Sport. and we actually had Ari Vatanen staying with us to do I think it was the Pirelli or one of them rallies, British Championship rallies in the Michelin Pilot car. And he turned and he said to me, he said, "Oh, what's this Mark II Escort for?" I said, "Oh, it's for me to learn to drive." And he said, "Oh, well, what are we waiting for?" So literally that was it. He took me in the car, and I was sat on Ari's knee, and then before we knew it, we had like cushions and stuff in there, and I was driving around myself. So Dad came home from work, and here I was driving around the fields in this Mark II Escort, and he had to concede that I had a better teacher than even he was, to be honest. So yeah, it's not a bad thing to be say you were taught to drive by Ari Vatanen, really.
Not really, no. First driving lesson.
Yeah. So yeah, that was how it all started.
So when you were doing the Formula Renault and the T cars, Matt, was the sort of, in your mind, was it always kind of going to go? Were you always going to go towards rallying, or were you still sort of thinking, actually, maybe I'm going to go a different route to my dad and go kind of down the racing route, or was it?
To be honest, Guy, I think at the start it was the only thing that you could do competitively before rallying, because obviously rallying you needed your road license at 17, and so the thinking was that it was a good way to actually, learn a bit about setup, sort of be in a competitive environment before going rallying. So that was the whole thinking behind it. And then in that second year of T-Cars, when I won the championship and we had a really good year and then went into Renault, I think there was probably a bit of a feeling then that maybe I could stick to the circuit racing. And then, we started with Renault, and, the year got better and better. I think I was probably at quite a disadvantage at the start without doing any karting and, the racecraft side of things. And then obviously as that improved throughout the year, the thinking was that, we would do another year of Renault. And then we made the fatal mistake of, I actually drove a WRC car at like 16, halfway through that year on the airfield. And that, to be honest, that was it. The Formula Renault suffered after that, because I was like, well, I just want to go rallying. So that was sort of how it happened. And then we got to the end of that year in, I think it was 2003, and sort of had discussions with Manor, and they were sort of saying, right, well, we'll carry on. The end of the season was good, and we can do another year. And I sort of had to make the tough decision and sort of turn around to my dad and say, look, my heart's in rallying. That's where I want to be. So we had to tell him that, sorry, we're going to the stages.
So what was the next step then? So how do you so what was the first sort of step into rallying then at that point?
So I mean, at that point, unfortunately, like, it was a bit of a strange time for rallying. I mean, there wasn't really what there is now. There was no R5, there was nothing like that back then, and there was nothing within the M Sport stable other than WRC. It was well before we'd done even the front wheel drive stuff. So we looked at quite a few things. We looked at like Super 600, but obviously there wasn't a Ford in there. So we went to the airfield at the end of the year and took a WRC car. And Dad sat with me and sort of said, well, why don't you just start in a WRC? Which is a bit of a shock. And then we went to Forest.
Were you 03 at this point, just before the 04 season?
Yeah, so I think we were at a 2001 Focus up there or something at the airfield. And then the next step after that was we went to one of the local forests where we did all the testing. And I had 2 days in the car there. And on the second day, we got Scott to come and sit with me, because the idea was that he was going to co-drive. And to be honest, I think he got in, and I had done 2 full days, and I was relatively up to speed even for that age and that time. And he got a real shock and basically said, well, I can't do it. I can't read notes in a WRC car at this point. So that sort of frightened him a bit. But I think once we did more and more together, it's fine. But so that's how it all started. So a bit of an unusual thing at 16, 17 to be in a full-blown WRC car. But it was just sort of how it worked out, really.
And did it come quite easily to you when you went to gravel? Did you find it relatively sort of at home on the gravel?
Yeah, pretty much, Guy. I mean, I think obviously the car control side of it and stuff like that, I'd been used to sort of driving around fields and quad bikes and stuff like that from when I was 7, 8 years old. So the car control bit came naturally. It was actually the difficult bit was was the first tarmac rally really in that year, which was, I think it was Donegal I did. That was actually more difficult than the first gravel rally really. So yeah, it came fairly naturally, pretty quick really.
I feel at this point that we need to cover something that will be on the minds of some people listening, which is, Dad's a former British Rally champion. Dad owns Malcolm Wilson Motorsport, M Sport as it had become. He runs the WRC program. It's easy to become a rally driver when your dad's Malcolm Wilson. I know from talking to you previously and from talking to Malcolm as well that it ain't that easy. It's almost like the kid in the class whose teacher's at the front of the classroom. It's, yes, you're in the right place. Yes, you've got the opportunity to have the conversation with the boss more than other people might have. But beyond that, it becomes pretty difficult, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's like anybody, I think, that's, a son of, of somebody that's been there before. I mean, even in, look at in Formula One now, he's Carlos Jr. and, Carlos Sr. He's always going to be compared to his dad in some ways. And it's the same with me. I mean, but I think it definitely had more positives than negatives. I mean, I think it definitely allowed me, I had an insight right from the beginning, right from as soon as I could remember, of seeing all these different drivers come through, even through Malcolm Wilson Motorsport. We had Ari, we had Francois Delacour, people like that. And then obviously when it went to M Sport, Colin, Carlos, there was a massive amount of, of different drivers came through the company. And I had just the chance to actually sit back and see how each of them operated and, the different traits that they had. So I think that put me at a huge sort of advantage from the beginning. And obviously it opens a lot of doors, but, in some ways it probably closed quite a few doors as well. I mean, I think, I spoke to a couple of manufacturers, about obviously, later on in my career when I'd been doing some development driving of, all the different M Sport cars. I spoke to a couple of manufacturers about doing some test driving and stuff. And they were obviously quite keen, but I think one of the off-putting things was that the feeling would be I would go straight back to M Sport and I would tell them exactly where all these other manufacturers were and what they were doing. So, I think it's like anything. It has its positives and its negatives. But I think certainly on
car though, in terms of that kind of everyone else having to fight for their drive and the kind of naysayers saying, oh, well, Matt Wilson didn't have to fight for his drive. That's not true, because all the way through, I remember you scrabbling for sponsors even towards the back end of your career. You had to work just as hard as the next man, didn't you, in some respects?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the whole Stobart thing was, that in the WRC team that they ran, that came from, from obviously like, sort of hard work of, of them obviously coming and showing an interest in buying, two cars at the very beginning, and, me not being involved in the project at all. They actually purchased two cars from M Sport as an exercise for them to do whatever they wanted. And then once they were there and they made their plans, I put a lot of pressure on them to sort of say, look, I want to be involved and how can we do it? And then obviously it just went from there. And then obviously Mark Higgins joined and we had, two incredible seasons in British Championship, and then obviously moved on to World Championship. So, without them guys as well, I wouldn't have had the career that I had, because certainly as the WRC went on from sort of 2006 onwards, it was actually for quite a while there, it was down to two manufacturers, and that was M Sport and Citroen. So without the sort of private teams like Stobart and them sort of people in there, the WRC would have actually been quite a thin on the ground in terms of entries and and competition really.
Yeah. I'm just looking
so
here.
At this point then you're competing in the British Rally Championship in a World Cup, and I remember those days. They were brilliant days to be watching the BRC, just watching World Cup. I remember Lapfalo I think he was in an 01 Focus, wasn't he, when it went to the gate post. There were some iconic moments that stick in your head from that era. 2005 really was the year that got away for you, wasn't it? It was the championship title that should be on that shelf behind you in many respects.
Yeah, I mean, that is something that I do sort of have a slight regret about. I mean, I actually had some, I had some success in rallying, as you mentioned, but I actually don't have a championship to my name. And after having that T-Cars championship, when I was only 15 or whatever, you suddenly at that age you think, oh well, they're all going to come, that it's just going to happen. And then to actually not have a rallying one to my name was disappointing. And yeah, 2005 was probably the time to have done it. I mean, don't get me wrong, Mark would have been, stiff competition to beat, but yeah, that was obviously the year of my massive accident on the first round in Wales, and then obviously was out for I think 3-4 months, and then when I came back, I actually managed to win the track road rally at the end of the year.
First rally back, weren't you?
You what? Sorry.
Second overall on your first rally back.
Yeah, we went up and did one of the Scottish Championship rounds just to try and come back, and I remember that first stage being, like I didn't really feel nerves, and then we sat on the start line of the first stage, and I remember like literally holding my hand out, and I was scared.
Just for anyone who doesn't know, Matt had it was a big accident. I mean, you broke your arm on your wrist, I think, and Scott broke his leg. Is that right?
Yeah. So we left the road at in what's a famous bit in Garth Einiog stage in Wales called Ski Slope. It's literally probably a mile of just flat out slight left-handers all down a hill, and at the bottom of the hill there's a big compression and a right-hander, and basically Mark was leading the rally, I was second at that point, and Mark had retired just before the end of the ski slope section. I think I glanced to the left, saw Mark had retired, and probably flashed through my mind, oh shit, I'm leading a BRC rally now. Missed the breaking point for the right-hander and hit this compression in the bottom, and the O2 Focus had a bit of a tendency of, through a compression, it would kick up the rear end, and we hit this compression way too fast, flicked the rear up, and it left the road, and it went sort of into a tree, but with the bottom of the windscreen first, and we went from 168 kph to 0 in, I think it was 1.1 seconds or something like that, and yeah, I ended up with smashed kneecap, 2 broken arms, a broken wrist. Scott had a compound fracture of his femur. So I remember, looking down and just seeing Scott's femur bone sticking through his leg and through his overalls, and yeah, it was pretty horrendous. And there's probably another podcast in itself about the recovery and stuff from then, how we managed to get out of the stage. I mean, that was a little bit of a comedy show at the time. But yeah, horrific accident, and obviously took a while to come back. I think I was out for 3 or 4 months, and then came back and did a Scottish Championship rally as a bit of a warm-up, and then back into British Championship, and then managed to win the track road rally, which I think was the youngest ever BRC winner at the time. So yeah, I mean, it was a bit of what could have been really that year. As you say, it would have been nice to have a rally championship to my name, and that was probably the most likely time to have done it, really.
Is there not still a chance you could have a go at that? I mean, you came back in an R5 Fiesta with that iconic Michelin Pilot Sport livery on back, what was that, 2014?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I would love to go back and do, BRC. And now with R5 and stuff in there, I think there's you never say never. That's definitely something that could maybe be something for the future. So it would be definitely nice to try and emulate the old man and have a BRC title.
Definitely.
So much was said about the program, the kind of the plan that was in place for you at the time in the rally media and everything else. And there you were, a bit of a frustrating season in the BRC, but then you got the shot. Was it alongside Duval, the first WRC campaign?
So it was a bit of a mix. I mean, the Stobbart guys then, obviously the step up from BRC to WRC was a significant step in terms of cost as well. So they actually ran one full-time car, which was for myself, and then we had various drivers join who obviously brought some of their own budget and joined on their own specialist rallies. We had, I think, Marcus's protege at the time, Kosti Katayamaki, did a few rallies. We had Luis Perez Companc as well, the Argentinian customer of ours, that did a few rallies. So and then even towards the end of the year, I think Yari joined as well. So we had quite a few different teammates, and I think that was something that was, in some ways was good, but I think in some ways was a negative for me. I was in the 2005 car, and obviously M Sport had launched the 06 Focus, so I was actually the only one in the older spec car at that time, and probably would have been quite good to have a consistent teammate you would have been able to always compare yourself to and look at the data and stuff like that. So effectively I was a little bit on my own until the end of the year, and then we stepped up to the 06 car. So Yeah, that was my first full sort of WRC campaign. And I mean, I'll never forget getting to Monte Carlo and doing the recce and thinking, what the hell am I doing? You know, I'm 18-year-old. And it was one of the most tough Monte Carlos for quite a long time. I think it was a real mix of a lot of snow and then obviously, you know, the typical Monte dry bits, snow, wet, tarmac, the whole thing. I remember getting to the shakedown in Sospel and having done the recce, got to the service area, and Marcus Gronome coming across and he went, "Oi, this is the most difficult Monte shakedown I've ever done in my life." And at that point, I hadn't done a run through a shakedown. I'm thinking, "Oh God, what am I doing?" So I literally, got through the event, just built the pace up. Managed to had one little misdemeanor, but right at the end of the day, broke a suspension arm and hit a patch of ice and hit the rock face. Broke the suspension arm, managed to fix it and get back to Monaco, finish the event, and that was a real sort of relief to get that one out of the way. The most difficult one, and then obviously the season just went from there really.
What was the relationship with you and the team and your dad like? Was it very much team manager? Or satellite team manager as it was at the time, or was it dad and lad? Did you have the chance to speak to him as his son at times? I'm fascinated by that dynamic.
Yeah, I mean, it was a difficult one. I mean, it depended really. If things were going well, he was my dad. If things were going badly, then he was the team manager. Do you know what I mean? It was. I think that was always where we had to be really quite careful, and probably on the event we had quite a professional relationship. And I would just take the advice, and obviously at that point he'd managed so many young drivers and brought them on. If you think of all the the champions effectively, and Marco Martin, Deval, Jari Matti, Miko, all them guys, they'd come through right from the beginning. So he was probably one of the best in the business of actually bringing young drivers through. So I just had to try and soak that, take all that in, and obviously listen to his advice really. And we had a plan. We had a 5-year plan. We had a long-term plan, which I was very grateful for. A lot of people don't have that stability. But then once the event finished, when we were back home, we really had to try and just put the rally into one side and not try and talk about it. Because otherwise, you're never away from it in some ways. And obviously at that age, 18, 19, still living at home, so it does make it quite difficult. So we really had to try and separate the two. I think we managed reasonably well. I mean, I think some of the more difficult times came just before I stepped up to WRC. I mean, there was one instance I'll never forget in the first year where we went to do a rally called the Red Dragon, which is in South Wales. And the whole idea of doing it was that it used stages that were from Rally GB. So all the nice sort of South Wales stages. So the whole thing was, I remember the start of the rally, he sat down and he said, "Right, all I want you to do is finish the event. You just need to learn the stages. You're coming back in 2 or 3 months to do Rally GB. That's all I ask. I'm not bothered about the times." And obviously, typical young 17, 18-year-old, I set off like a bat out of hell. Got to the end of towards the end of the first stage, and literally we stalled on a hairpin. And we were in the 99 Focus then, actually, Colin McRae's Safari winning car. So we got to the end of the stage and stalled the engine, and it wouldn't restart. So it took more than a minute to restart. So obviously another car come past and we set off again, and we were in the dust and literally 500 meters from the finish, and the mist was down, the red mist was down, and I sort of kept pushing and couldn't see anything, and ended up rolling the car and putting it down this bank. And obviously that was rally over. So we'd only managed to do one stage of the day, and I'll never forget, I've never ever seen him as mad. I mean, he literally picked up my helmet and he threw it, a bit of a Lewis Moyer moment. He threw it at the car and basically said, "Right, I want you and Scott in the workshop tomorrow morning, 6 o'clock in the morning. You're both stripping this car yourself." So that was it. We had the long drive back from Wales, and then we were in the workshop this morning at 6 o'clock, stripping the car back to a bare shell. So I think some of the more difficult times were actually before I got to the WRC in some ways.
Yeah. You don't want to be on the receiving end of a Malcolm Wilson telling off.
No, you know about them guy, don't you?
We've all been there. I can feel it. But yeah, I mean, but what an amazing journey. I mean, obviously, again, sort of being so young and driving these fantastic cars. I mean, driving Colin McRae's car there. I mean, what an experience. Just to, even to say, being able to do that, it's amazing.
It's now on display, isn't it, in its original spec and colour scheme, in the original Martini colour scheme in M Sport. Is that right?
Yeah, because that wasn't the only time I actually managed to crash that car.
You have to walk past it probably every day, don't you? That's the thing.
Yeah, well, that's what I mean, guy. Actually, literally every time you walk through the workshop, it's in that link between the offices and the workshop. So you go past it every day, and yeah, I have to look at that and think, yeah, well, last time I drove that, it was on its side in a ditch, basically. And I think that was when Dad decided, right, that car's had enough punishment. We need to put it, there's far too much history there. It needs to go back into its original safari spec and go in the museum now. Doesn't need any more punishment.
So then you basically stepped up to WRC full time. That's the next step. And how was that, Matt? I mean, it's quite it's a big step up, isn't it? A lot of pressure, a lot of new events. Been on the sort of the snow, the ice, tarmac, gravel. There's a lot of learning to do, isn't there?
Yeah, and I think we sort of stepped up, and as I said before, we were lucky enough to have this sort of 5-year plan in place, and that, I think that meant that we weren't definitely that first year. The whole aim was to really just finish the events. I think the only time really I was sort of properly let off the leash was Rally GB, because we'd done it a couple of times before. But the main thing before then, and especially at that time, that the rallies weren't changing at all really. So every year, pretty much the stages were the same. Whether they were maybe slightly different here and there, but in general, the stages were always the same. So the whole thing was basically create set pace notes for each event, finish the stages, get the experience, and then the following year come back and then just try and build on it year on year. And then there was obviously odd times and events where Dad knew that he needed to let me off the leash a bit. Otherwise, it was difficult to just be holding back. And even in that first year, we did a couple of rallies back in the UK just to try and because you were finishing 9th, 10th, sometimes out the points 12th, 13th or whatever, but you were just trying to learn. And so I think he realized it was important as well at that point to do some smaller events and actually remember what it felt like to win and to be setting fastest time. So we even then we did come back and we did some sort of BTRDA stuff, did Grisdale and stuff like that, just to try and sort of be let off the leash a bit and keep that that winning feeling, if you like. So yeah, I mean that was tough, but obviously as the years went on and we built up that experience, it just got better and better. And I think we sort of had some highs, with the 4th place in 2007 in Japan, and that sort of was a bit of a turning point. That felt like right, okay, we're one step away from the podium now. We can definitely do this. So that's sort of how it went, Guy, really, and it just sort of evolved from there. And I think we were, if I look back, I'm probably disappointed. I would probably change a lot of things. I would probably you sort of think maybe I should have not held back as much for as long, but I think as I said, I was very lucky to be in that position. And we had some amazing times and some amazing results. Some of the split times and stage times were good, but I just never really managed to actually piece it all together and actually, probably get a podium, which I think would have probably changed a lot. It's like when you get one of them, a podium or a win, and then it sort of gives you that confidence. And
it comes off, doesn't it? The pressure comes off.
Yeah, and
it's like Paul was saying there. When you were doing WRC, it was incredibly competitive, and effectively you were in a works team. And I know, having been, obviously knowing you well and knowing M Sport and speaking to people at M Sport, despite what people might think, you were in the best equipment. You're always kind of like, on used bits from some of the works cars or whatever else. Now, which is it's a great opportunity still, but you are against the factory cars with factory drivers, and you know, we've seen with Elfin, you know, I mean, Elfin now is, you know, on the verge of, you know, potentially being a world champion, fingers crossed. But, you know, we know, I mean, I know Elfin, you know, through yourself, and, you know, it's not been a smooth journey to get to where he is. And, you know, it's taken a long time to get where he is. And it could easily be different. And maybe you could say with you, if you'd had another couple of years, maybe stepped up into the work team, it could be a different story. So it's incredibly difficult. I think WRC is difficult because a lot of it is about gaining that experience and knowledge. And, you know, the age you were at, you know, it's still incredibly young in rally terms. You know,
Yeah.
You were part of a business as well, weren't you, man? And it wouldn't have been necessarily good business to put everything into making you a world champion, whereas it is good business to put everything into making Mikko Hirvonen a world champion or Latvala or someone like that, isn't it? Because that's how the business works.
Yeah, I mean, I think taking both of your points there and going back to Guy's point, I think, you know, there is some people that, you know, it does take a long time. You know, I think there's very different characters and different types of drivers in WRC. You know, sadly, it's, you know, is it 15 years since we lost Richard yesterday? And he was a very different type of driver to what Colin was. You know, Richard did it in sort of Elvin Evans type way. You know, it took a while, and you know, he just built it up gradually, and it just went step by step. And obviously Colin, we all know what Colin was like. He was just flat out whatever the situation. So I think we sort of took a bit more of the Richard Burns approach to it. And that was what sort of how we were planning. But yeah, I mean, I remember we were, you know, as Guy said, we didn't always have the latest equipment. You know, I mean, if there was sometimes, you know, that Mikko and Marcus would come in and they'd take the brakes, the discs and the pads out of their car. And then at the end of the day, I would get them discs and pads for the following day. So, you know, it was stuff like that. And, you know, but on the other hand, I had some good times where I actually ran some of the new stuff ahead of, you know, of the works guys, just to, you know, if it was going to break, it was better it broke on my car than on their car. So it was sometimes an extended test. So again, it's that whole thing. It has, you know, pluses and minuses, but it definitely was at that point, I think probably the most competitive era, as you said. You know, I mean, obviously Loeb just dominated, but then you had Marcus in there, you had Mikko, you had, you know, and if you think about it, Mikko is probably, I think, M Sport's most successful driver actually. And, you know, sadly never won the world championship, but, you know, as an incredible driver. And, you know, Latvala, all them guys. So that at that point it was hugely competitive. And I think the cars were, you know, they were quite difficult cars at that time as well. And quite a few changes happened through that sort of period as well. We went from having the fully confidential Michelin tires with the mousse inside them and like loads of different choices and being able to cut them and the whole thing, to then, you know, a year or so later go into a one make tire from Pirelli, which was, you know, changed the cars completely. I mean, remember the Pirelli tire was so strong that we went to Argentina and we were actually, you know, we were hitting stuff, you know, rocks that we'd hit past that, you know, you normally get a puncture, and the tire was staying inflated, but it was actually breaking the suspension. So, you know, there was quite a lot of changes even through that era to try and adapt to as well. So yeah, it was brilliant times. I mean, I wouldn't change the times. I mean, if I look back, I would do things quite a bit differently. And I think, to be honest, I think I learned a lot from actually, you know, and this is, I'm not trying to get on Guy's good side, but even from, you know, people like Guy and Stephen and that, when you went into the racing side, you actually saw there's a lot more focus on driver performance in racing, which I think is something that in rallying doesn't really exist as much. You know, rallying in some ways, you don't really look at the data and analyze, compare yourself to other drivers. I mean, yeah, you go through a lot of onboard and you check the pace notes and stuff like that. But I actually learned a lot from that side of it, from the racing side, that, you know, you could have analysed your own performance a lot more and probably progressed yourself a bit quicker by using some of them tools that were available, really. And, you know, in racing, you know, a lot of people have like a, you know, driver coach as well, and that's something that in rallying never really, certainly in that era, you know, wasn't really there. So yeah, it was great times, and as I say, I wouldn't change anything, wouldn't change it for the world.
Is that something you think you'll implement going forward with the rally guys, and working more on the driver development? And, you know, obviously a thing like now, like with obviously GoPros, onboard cameras, YouTube. There's so many more tools available, aren't there now, to sort of work with.
Yeah.
In a rally car, you pretty much, you get on the stage on your own, and you can't, it's hard to sort of compare, isn't it? But I guess now we've got more tools to use to do that.
Yeah, definitely, guy. I mean, I think, you know, the minute you go down a stage and you sort of know in yourself, if you're, say you get to the end and you're 5 seconds off the fastest and you think, okay, I think I know where that was. I made a little mistake here or a little mistake there. But, you know, if you had more tools like you have in racing, you could maybe be, you know, 10 seconds faster, if you could just, you know, if you could analyze it more. But definitely rallying is going that way. And I think, you know, from the, you know, especially with the 2017 cars, you know, with the aero and you know how much of a step up they were, I think the whole thing took another step again. I mean, you know, we're looking at like simulator type work and stuff like that, and obviously the, you know, the WRC Plus, where you've got every onboard from every driver. I mean, that is a massive tool now, and I think, you know, the guys spend so much time before an event, you know, and I think you've seen probably like events like Finland and stuff now, which took so long to actually perfect, and then your pace notes perfect them, and, you know, is that jump flat or is it not? And I think now that, you know, that you've seen that people like Kalle Rovanperä and, you know, certainly, you know, Oliver Solberg, people like that they're young, they're only, you know, 18, 19-year-old, but they're, you know, they're right on the pace. And I think that comes from, a lot of it is from like the WRC type plus type thing, where they can go and they can watch the onboard, and if somebody's done it flat, well, it must be flat, so I can make my notes flat, you know, to sort of go with it. So I think that has sort of changed rallying quite a bit, and I think they are definitely going more into that, you know, analysis of performance. And, you know, Sebastian Ogier was a big one for that. He would, you know, you would get to midday service, and, you know, rather than relax and have something to eat, he would be right into the engineers area and he'd be watching, you know, his onboard from the morning and be looking at data and stuff. So I think that he sort of brought in another element to it as well. But yeah, it definitely was at that time when I was competing, certainly, you know, in the early part, 2006, 2007, there wasn't really any focus at all on, you know, how you could improve by looking at other people and stuff like that. It was sort of, that wasn't really within rallying at that point.
Yeah. You know what though? You talk about looking at an onboard and thinking about how you could improve based on that person's onboard. I watched Kalle Rovanperä's onboard from the shakedown test that he was doing the other day. I don't know if you've seen this on Twitter. I think I shared it.
Yeah.
It is just phenomenal. I mean, I look at it and I think, how does a car go that fast towards a piece of Armco barrier and avoid that Armco barrier and turn at the last minute? It is those cars now, and you know, as you say, the youngsters that are driving, just, it's actually incomprehensible. Even to someone like me who's watched onboards of rally cars and been in rally cars at a much lower level for years, all my life, in fact, it is just incomprehensible, I think is the only word I can bring to the party on that one.
Yeah, I think the you know, you'll know from when you spoke to Elvin and stuff probably, but I think the aero, you know, from the 2017 cars onwards, I think that's changed massively. I mean, I remember speaking to Esa-Pekka Lappi, and the year he won Finland, you know, that's another example of somebody, you know, quite inexperienced. I know it's his home event, but he actually won the rally with the Toyota. And chatting to him, and he had a decent lead going into Sunday, and he backed off slightly into Sunday, and he had like quite a few moments on the first couple of stages, and he realised that, you know, the worst thing he could do actually was back off, because, you know, corners that were easy flat, you know, he was having a slight lift, but obviously with less aero, it was unsettling the car. So he actually just found it easier to just go straight back onto the, you know, driving flat out, and it felt, you know, actually felt safer and more in control, funnily enough. So I think that is the first time that, you know, WRC cars have really had, like, you know, that much influence from an aerodynamic point of view.
You've driven one on the side of the WRC though, haven't you? You're the only person to have done that on the return to rallying earlier this year.
Yeah.
And you won the rally. But I think you're the only person to have driven one outside of the WRC, aren't you? The new style cars?
Yeah, I would. Yeah, probably, Paul. I think. Yeah, I mean, I think certainly if I didn't know my way around Greystoke, it was a bad job.
I think an expected result, but you must have, because it was the first time that you've driven those cars in anger. You've tested them, of course. That must have been quite eye-opening, even at that level, to be out in one of those cars, surely. Yeah,
it was, to be honest. I mean, I think, you know, I joke, and I probably could drive around Greystoke blindfolded. I mean, you know, I've spent so long in there doing, you know, development stuff with all the cars that we've done from the past in M Sport. But yeah, you're right. Even getting onto the start line of that first stage with the WRC car on the rally, and just actually seeing, you know, knowing I was about to go down a piece of road that I've driven down hundreds of times, but when you put a set of you know, like lights in front of you and a countdown clock, all of a sudden it completely changes you, and you're back into that sort of competitive zone, really.
I think Malcolm would agree, wouldn't he?
Yeah, well, yeah, but he wasn't. He can't even have that excuse. He was in zero car, so he didn't even have the timing sheets to look at. But no, it was a great experience to drive a modern WRC car, definitely on a rally and not just on a test. So yeah, I definitely enjoyed that.
Fantastic. So Matt, so obviously we know from the rallying, obviously M Sport, the connection with myself and with Bentley going to circuit racing with the Bentley GT program, and obviously you kind of sort of ran that program. That's your program as sort of team manager, program manager, whatever you want to call it. How was that sort of change for you to effectively do a real job as opposed to driving?
What, and try and keep you guys in control?
Yeah, exactly. You mean? Was it? You got a few more grey hairs?
To be honest, I think it came at a brilliant time for me. I mean, obviously my last full year in WRC was 2011. Did a couple of rallies in 2012, filled in for Nasser here in Sweden, and then put a deal together to do Rally GB the end of 2012. So, but even in that year, obviously I'd started to look and think, right, well, obviously WRC wasn't in the best of health. You know, there was only 2 manufacturers. It was unlikely I was going to get a full-time seat. So as throughout 2012, I'd started to spend more and more time in the business, and actually went round and worked in each department throughout the year, just, you know, a brief spell in each area, just so I really could sort of understand the business.
Yeah.
And then obviously 2013 came, and obviously that's where we first started with the Bentley contract. And then it all sort of stemmed with...
Sorry to interrupt you. I love the story. I remember Brian Gush telling me that when he had the meeting with your dad, he sort of said, would you be interested in racing? And then literally Malcolm's like, I'm interested, but he had no idea what GT3 was. He had no idea about any kind of racing or what it was. But he said, look, you know, I'm up for it. You know, kind of like typical Malcolm. You know, never sort of shies away from a challenge. But you know, kind of really embraced it, which was great.
No, I remember the phone call. I mean, he was down in the workshop, and Brian actually ran and left a message and with Angela and said, could you get Malcolm to call me back? It's Brian Gush from Bentley. So I remember he come back to his desk, and he actually he Googled who Brian was, did a bit of research, and then rang Brian back, and Brian said, well, I'd be interested to come up and visit you and actually talk about doing a GT3 program. And my dad turned around and he said, well, it sounds fantastic, Brian, but what's GT3? We literally at that point we'd only ever done rallying, and it came at a perfect time, as I say. Ford had literally pulled out the WRC as a full-blown manufacturer around the same time. So literally, one door in some way closed and another one opened. And Brian came up, had a look around, obviously liked what he saw, and then he managed to get, at the time, I think it was Wolfgang Schreiber that was the CEO at that point. They came up and they were sat in the boardroom at M Sport, and they were talking about the program. And next thing, Wolfgang got up, got round the table and shook my dad's hand and said, right, you've got a deal and we're going racing. So that's how it really kicked off. And then really the hard work then began, because we didn't, to be honest, Guy, I'm sure you remember, we didn't really have a clue. So we, through the group connection, the VW group connection, we got an Audi R8. So we got that for, I think it was for the first half of 2013, and we went and did the first 4 or 5 British GT rounds. And we just tried to build a team up from there, and obviously get the right people in place, and learn what happened in a pit stop, and really try and the basics effectively. And then obviously that ended after I think 4 rounds, and then we went to Goodwood and obviously launched the car, and you remember that well. And then I remember, before Goodwood, John Wickham, saying to me and my dad, this car is not going to be ready for Goodwood, is it? And we were, yeah, don't worry, John, it'll be ready. And I think he went back to Brian and said, there's absolutely no way this car is going to make Goodwood. And obviously, which worried Brian. But, in typical M Sport fashion, we just did what needed to be done. And I think there was probably a week of all-nighters, and got the car to Goodwood, which was obviously, the launch of it. And then we went from there to Abu Dhabi, and at the end of 2013, and nearly killed U3 off by getting poisoned from fumes coming in the car.
Yeah. And the best thing was we're doing the race, Paul, and there was some contact in the race, and basically there was some sort of exhaust fumes coming in the car. So that was basically what was happening. So what was happening is we'd start the stint, and by the end of it, we would have 10 laps to go. We'd be on the radio bitching like, "How long to go? I'm struggling." And then we sort of getting out of the car, feeling all dizzy and all confused, and then sort of having some rest. And the next time getting in the car, it's almost like you feel like you're pissed. So the car's coming down the pit lane, you feel like you've had about 10 pints. The car pulls in, and you're trying to do a drive. This is before you even.
And you're seeing 3 cars.
Seeing 3 cars, and all I remember was I actually remember Elaine, your mum, sort of saying, these racing drivers are absolute wusses. I mean, if they were rally drivers, they could drive. They could drive, through the night, whatever. And these racing drivers are just a load of girls. I mean, it's just panties. And it turned out that actually we were getting poison. It wasn't anybody's fault. It was just through this contact that we were actually getting carbon monoxide in the car, so we're feeling dizzy. But anyway, we got through it. We're all fine, and we finished the race, which was the most important thing, obviously, for Bentley's return to racing. And in the first race, it was to go there and get a result, which we did.
When did you find out that it was fumes into the cockpit? Was that during the race?
Kind of after the race,
Right.
because it's got silent.
You weren't just getting them back in the car, Matt, and telling them to shut up and get on with it.
Pretty much.
Basically, Paul, that's exactly what it was. It was like, just stop whinging, like you've had a rest, you've seen the physio, get back in and get on with it.
You made the phone call afterwards to say, lads, I've got to apologise here.
I think, to be honest, it was actually even quicker than that. I think we got the car out of Parc Fermé at the end of the race and had a look at the front, and I think we realised that the fresh air duct into the cockpit had actually been dislodged and blocked, and then there was fumes coming in there. So yeah, poor buggers were actually they weren't whinging for nothing, in fairness.
I've got to say, we heard this from the other side because we had Brian Gush on the podcast quite early on in the series, and your description of getting the car ready, he tells it from the other side, from sitting behind that boardroom door worrying about it not being ready. And he credits you guys for exactly the same thing. He said if we'd have had a race team, we'd have fired this project at them, or a manufacturer, they wouldn't have got it ready because there'd have been so much red tape and kind of bureaucratic bollocks. But actually, they were a rally team. They used to just picking up the tools, getting the thing ready. So you've seen how they rebuild cars. I think we were talking about Tanak's car at the time, and how you'd rebuilt that at the time.
The Titanic.
Yeah. So we're talking about things like that.
Which is also linked to us in a strange kind of way, because we owned that car at one point.
Of course, yeah.
So,
that's right.
But actually, just going back to the next race after Abu Dhabi, so that was obviously a 12-hour race at the end of 2013. But the first race of 2014 was at Monza, and Stephen Kane had a bit of a crash in qualifying. And
a bit of a crash, guy.
A bit of a crash.
That's an understatement.
Well, he's got this green helmet, and we were doing a track walk, and there's a big green wall. I can't remember what the chicane's called now. And he's like, if you hit the curb here, don't hit the curb here because the car will rotate. You'll end up in that green wall there, and it'll destroy the car. So do not hit the curb. Okay, Stephen. Thank you very much. Yeah, we won't hit the curb. Of course, he goes out for qualifying. What does he do? Lunges straight over the curb, spins it straight into the wall, and the car is pretty much destroyed. And again, to be fair, the guys, any normal race team would have put a sheet over it, put it in the truck and said that's our weekend done. And of course, being the first round of the championship, that's not the way you want to start your season. And the guys sort of set to work. We went off to back to the hotel and came back the next day. And I'm not joking. Not only was the car repaired, it looked like it looked $1 million. It didn't even look like it even been anywhere near a wall. And that's real testament to the team, because they just knuckled down and got on with it. And it was a case of, right, okay, I think Christian knew someone that knew Rossi, who had a body shop close by. And before you knew it, everybody who had a job and was off doing their bit. And, the car was good to go the next day. I think Malcolm made out a dummy invoice to Stephen and sort of said, here's your bill. And, but, we got back racing and we finished, we scored points and the car felt, just like normal, like brand new.
Was that something completely new, Guy, that mentality? Was that a mindset that GT racing had never seen before, really?
Yeah, I mean, race teams as a whole, they're very good at sort of mucking in and getting on and doing it. But generally they are race teams, so they can prep a car and they can change wishbones or whatever needs doing bodywork. But this was a rebuild. I mean, this was like bent chassis legs. This car was done really. But because they built the car, and Sport built the car, they were able to strip it right back and almost rebuild the car, from a shell and straighten the chassis legs, do all the work that needed to be done. And then all the cosmetic stuff was the last bit. So, I think that was I think for us, that was like, yeah, this team is, this is serious. I mean, yes, they're a rally team, but I think they got the respect in the paddock because it's like everyone sort of thought, oh, that's Bentley out. And then when this car rolled out onto the grid, looking like new, it was like, oh, that's amazing.
I'm sure. Sorry to interrupt you. I'm sure Brian maybe mentioned it, but I'll never forget. We were there, and it got to 10:30, 11 o'clock at night, and we obviously had the whole front end of it, as you can remember. The chassis legs were all at 90-degree angles and stuff, and there was so many people from up and down the pit lane. They walked past the front of the garage with the door open, and they said, "Oh, that's a real shame. We won't be seeing you on the grid tomorrow. That's a bit of a bummer on your first race." And then obviously the next morning we were still there. We hadn't gone, and door was open, and here was this brand new looking Continental in the garage there. And I think that in some ways, in a strange sort of way, I think for our first proper race in Europe, I think it made the team in a way. I think there was a real camaraderie there, and I think a thing of like, oh, we can do this. We can turn this around when people thought we couldn't really. And then obviously you guys walking in the morning and in Stephen's helmet box in the pit wall in there was an invoice made out to him. And I think that was sort of just right up Stephen's street, wasn't it? We all had a laugh about it, and it probably relaxed him and put him in the right frame of mind after a big shunt the day before when he felt pretty shit really. So I think it was, although it was a difficult night and a long night, I think it probably it was in some ways it was a good thing. I think it really brought everybody together and created a great atmosphere.
Well, I think at that point as a driver, when you see the team putting that kind of effort, it's like, right, these guys are putting in serious effort here. It makes you as it's like as a driver, it makes you want to put in, you want to match that effort.
Yeah.
And then for us, in the race, I think we finished like 8th or whatever, which was a good result to get the finish. And where we lost the time was on the pit stops, because it was our first real pit stop. So what we did was after that weekend, we kind of analysed it and said, look, our on-track performance and speed of the car and everything else, we should have finished probably 3rd or 4th, but we were losing, serious amount of time in the pit lane, in the pit stops. So we all went up to Cockermouth. We got the cars out and we practiced pit stops and we practiced pit stops and we practiced pit stops, and we went to Silverstone and we won. Because we knew we had the pace in the car, but now we had the pit crew and the strategy to execute and the different and that again for me and the rest of the guys in the team was like, this is serious now. It's actually, these guys are really stepping up. Everything we're saying to them to do, they're doing it. And we went from being contenders to then suddenly winning races and in with a shout at the championship. And I think it's a steep learning curve, but what a rewarding journey to see how everything was developing. And it was good, good fun. And I think you enjoyed it, Matt, and I think your dad enjoyed it. I mean, you've seen your dad obviously not knowing what GT racing was or not really having any interest in circuit racing, to seeing his enthusiasm, being stood there, like understanding the race and getting involved in it and the strategy was great to see. And I know obviously you were on our pit stand, you were on the radio to car 7. So you kind of feel invested in it, don't you? And
yeah, I think that definitely, Guy. And I think, going back to your point from like Monza and the pit stops and stuff, I'll never forget, we analysing the race afterwards, watching the highlights and stuff like that. And even at the time, I think we were probably pretty close to, in the pit lane to somebody like WRT, who, were the real benchmark for pit stops. And I remember, watching our guys and we were coming in, in a decent position, but then leaving the pits and, having lost probably 2 or 3 places. So analysing it all afterwards and thinking, right, shit, we've got some serious work to do. Yeah, and then again, you guys came up, you matched the effort and came up, and while we were doing the practice pit stops, you were doing practice driver changes and stuff like that. And I think there was a real, like a collective push, wasn't there, between everybody in the team and the drivers pushing for the same thing, and then to the point where we even built then like a pit stop rig, so we didn't even have to rely on a full carbon available all the time and stuff like that. I think we really did try and sort of take it to the sort of next level, if you like, within GT environment. I don't think that had really been seen before. So it was nice to sort of come in and have some different ideas. Obviously we weren't set in our ways because we didn't have any prior experience. So we were doing everything, sort of first time out. And I think we probably did a few things a little bit differently, and and hopefully I think people did actually copy us in a way, which was a nice feeling. So yeah, it was brilliant times, like really good times. I mean, I'll never forget the Silverstone one was amazing, but I think for me that the Ricard one was probably the more tense. I think Stephen in at the end in the dark, and the one light was up here and one light was down here, and he's on the radio saying, "All I can see is fucking owls in the trees. These lights are set so bad," and stuff like that. And obviously that was a much closer one. We were being chased rather than the one doing the chasing like at Silverstone. So that one was probably more nerve-wracking in a way, because in Silverstone, Stephen was just on the attack in that last hour, and we were hauling it in, and you were thinking, oh well, if we finish second, it's a result. But to get that win. But then the second one was a totally different feeling. I'll never forget feeling so nervous sat on the pit wall as we were getting chased down and counting down the time till the end of the race. So yeah, amazing first year it was, definitely.
We're heading towards a time, Matt, where motorsport and even the basic chemistry of what we do, whether it's rally, race, Dakar, even marine racing, things like that, everything is changing. And you guys, as a business, being able to show that you can go into a completely new arena with no prior experience, knowledge, tooling, engineering, or even knowledge of basic regs, such as what class of racing it was, and coming out and winning within such a short period of time without really any involvement from the manufacturer from a technical point of view, must have been a great way. And you must be looking at using that to showcase what you can do as we move into this new era of whether it's electric, whether it's hybrid, and whatever happens in the future. You've kind of shown your colours there, haven't you?
Yeah, I'd like to think so. I mean, I think we definitely, I think, yeah, you're right. I mean, the massive change was only doing rallying and then going to racing. And I think, now we've got that experience. We've got a little bit of experience on the electric side from doing the Jaguar I-Pace thing as well, that followed Formula E. So I think we've got a good breadth of knowledge there. But you're totally right. I mean, like motorsport is changing. It's changing massively, and I don't think I've ever seen such a big sort of sea change in motorsport ever, really. And I think it's always been that motorsport has led the way for road car development, and motorsport's always been at the forefront. And I think at the minute, what I see happening is that that the road car push is changing the way that motorsport goes in a way, and it's a complete role reversal. And I'll never forget, I think we were at Nürburgring, Guy, actually, one of the Blancpain endurance races, and it was Mr. Durheimer that was there, the current chairman of, he was the current chairman of Bentley at the time, and that was at that point the whole Dieselgate scandal broke, and I'll never ever forget him saying that, he turned around and he said, "This is going to change the motor industry forever." And I thought at the time, you think, what a bold statement, what's he didn't really understand the whole implications behind it. But if you think about it, he wasn't wrong. I mean, from that moment on, that really pushed the whole electric hybrid type thing much more to the forefront. and probably has changed the whole face of the motor industry and certainly motorsport really. So it was a massive thing, and at the time didn't really think to obviously knew it was serious, and you knew it was going to have implications, but you didn't really realize that as he said, it has changed the whole motor industry in some ways.
So where do you see rallying going? Because obviously we see with circuit racing, obviously they've obviously got Extreme E, which is going to be interesting. I don't quite understand it yet, but it's interesting. Formula E is obviously really booming. A lot of the manufacturers need to, obviously they're all trying to say, well, what's our 10-year plan? How do we want to be seen? So they're all definitely going towards that electric route, and it makes you question about, in terms of the regular combustion engine, how much relevance it's got going forward. I mean, obviously in our era, we all grew up with noisy racing rally cars, and they sound great, smell great. But the kind of generation of today, they don't understand that. It's all about the tech. Yeah. That's what they get excited by. So do you think that rallying's going to, where do you see rallying going in the next sort of 10 years? Do you think
to be honest, Guy, it's a really good question, and I don't know. I mean, I think, obviously the next generation WRC car, which is 2022, is going to have hybrid, which is the first step really on the on that line, and I think following that, probably that'll filter down to R5 as well. So that's going to obviously the first step. But as you say, when you've got the UK saying that by 2030 there'll be no more internal combustion engines, where does that leave? You what? Sorry?
You sell cars, and in theory, in 2030, you can't sell any of the current cars that you have in the UK.
Exactly.
It's kind of mind blowing when I sat alongside you in 2011, and you told me about what a great change or a massive change it was that you had a pull lever for the gear change again from the flappy pedals, and we were talking about that and all the active diff stuff changing. Yeah, that seemed seismic at the time.
In theory, your service vehicle is going to be a charging station. You're going to get to the end of the stage. You're going to be charging up, and the issue at the minute is you can charge, but how quickly can you charge, and all that kind of. So there's loads of stuff going on. I mean,
I'm done with this now, Guy. I'm done with this.
Even if on the road, even if the road section was done on battery and you know what I mean. So there's parts, elements, and you have to use battery on the road parts. And if you don't have enough charge, you're out the rally or whatever. But do you know what I mean?
I think you've just done it. That is the new regs.
As much as we laugh, that is, it is gonna be something like that. I think the trouble with rallying is there's a lot more of a challenge going electric than there is circuit racing, where you're in a controlled environment, Guy, and you've got the chance of of all your charges lined up or whatever it may be. And I think rallying is probably different to that, and there's a lot more challenges to it. But I think the thing that's interesting us most at the minute, and certainly got to be something for the future, is hydrogen. That's definitely got to be something that I think is, from a motorsport, and particularly like an endurance or rallying type of motorsport, that's got to be something that's got to be looked at for the future. I think the electric side's got its I think it's got its perfect place in Formula E and in that type of and for sure, like the battery life and stuff's only going to get better. But I think if you still want to do real endurance type stuff and adventure stuff like WRC is, and like the 24 hours of Le Mans, Spa, stuff like that, for them events still to exist, there's going to have to be something like a hydrogen equivalent.
And I think that's what they're looking at, aren't they? Certainly Le Mans 2024. I think that's kind of hydrogen that they're looking at. And I think, as I said, with all the manufacturers, they need to have that kind of, they need to be seen to be going down that route. So it's interesting. As I said, never before have we seen so much change in both industries, in the automotive industry as a whole and motorsport. And it's going to be an interesting couple of years to see which way it all sort of shakes out, really.
As a fan, definitely. I'm impressed about the whole lack of engine noise and engine smell. So I do need to bring us back to the smelly, iconic cars, if I can, with a question that we had from Phil Taylor this morning on Twitter. He said, has Matt ever driven Malcolm's Michelin Pilot Escort? Of course, your 2014 R5 emulated that livery, but have you ever driven the car, the one that I grew up as one of my hero cars? And
sadly not. No, sadly not. I mean, one thing I would love to have driven, but what a feeling to like put that livery on on an R5 car, or I think it was a regional rally car or whatever it was at the time, and go and do Rally GB, and even to, I'll never forget the delivery from Sparko, Michelin pilot overalls arriving, and it was just like, it was probably like the most excited. I'd done all them things in rallying before, but that was probably just a real iconic moment. It was one of them, like, Martini livery or whatever. There's some real classics, isn't there? And that Michelin pilot was one of them. So that was a brilliant feeling to me.
And it was 20 years after your dad took the championship as well. And I've got a picture of you, which I'll try and dig out. I sent it to you ages ago, of you being cuddled by your dad at the end of the stage on that last rally that year, and he's in his Michelin pilot overalls. So you've never actually had it, even driven it right out of the museum?
No, I mean, because at the time, obviously, he doesn't actually have that car anymore.
You've got the other one, haven't you?
Never kept it. So he actually, obviously, at that time, I was too young to have driven it, and then it went on, and it was World Rally Car Escorts rather than Group A Escorts and stuff. So I think if you asked him, that's probably one of his regrets. Actually, is not having that car. I mean, he's still got some real good pieces of history stored away, but that was one of them that he would probably have liked to have kept, I think.
He's got Delacour's Escort, hasn't he? Is that right?
Yeah, there's a Group A. I think it's a rally winning one. It's an Escort driven by Delacour. Yeah, but I think he would, if he would have liked to have kept any, or he should have kept any, it was the Michelin pilot one.
Okay. Another question as well is from Mark Ammons, and you liked this tweet, so there must be a good story here. Like the best of us, you were a fan before you became a driver. Do you remember falling in the river in Greece in 1994 when spectating, relieving the spectators on a tense hot day?
Yeah, I remember it well. Actually, I wasn't very old, and I remember we were with I think it was a long time WRC photographer at the time, and he kindly offered to take me and Mum and Mark, and he was actually Brian Thomas's nephew. So we were all traveling around together watching the stages and stuff, and we got this water. Ralph Hardwick, who was the photographer, he wanted to get to this water splash and get some action shots from there. So of course, I was only young, so I'm messing around, jumping from stone to stone, and managed to fall in the river and soak myself. At that age, obviously, it was a massive drama, as I've got like my shorts trying to dry on a rock as we're waiting for these rally cars to arrive. So yeah, I haven't forgotten that one.
Brilliant. I do like the questions that we get, but normally they're race car, rally car related. So I appreciated that one. Thank you, Mark.
So Paul, should you do some quick fire questions?
I think we should.
Okay. Are you ready for this, Matt?
Go on, Guy.
First thing that comes in. So, the usual one. So Top Gear or Grand Tour?
Top Gear.
Tarmac or gravel?
Gravel.
Gravel. Beach holiday or adventure holiday?
Beach.
Dogs or cats?
Oh, that's easy. Dogs.
Yeah. Oversteer or understeer?
What about neutral? Can you have that?
No, it never happens.
When do you ever have a neutral car? Very rare.
No, that's very true. Probably a hint of oversteer.
Right. Okay. Good.
I've got to say, Guy, it wasn't so controversial on the dogs and cats front this time, but a fell runner who prefers a beach holiday to an adventure holiday.
Well.
Yeah. Well, I managed to get all my adventures in Cumbria. You see, so when you go away, it's nice to actually just go away and chill out.
Nice plug for Visit Cumbria there.
You what, sorry?
Nice plug for Visit Cumbria there, when the restrictions now again.
Yeah, exactly.
But I know Matt, when he's a bit like me. He goes on holiday, but then he goes running anyway. So you do a bit of training. So
that's true.
So, Loeb or Ogier?
Ogier.
V6 or V8?
Oh, definitely V8.
V8. Okay, so I've got a pass-along question from Andy Wallace, and he said, "What's the most stupid thing you've ever done in a rally car?"
Probably one of them is the story I told you about, actually, where I crashed on that Red Dragon, which was the most ridiculous thing. And then the other one was doing some, I'm not proud of this one, but I was doing some, Race Champions was in the stadium, in Wembley Stadium, and they were using the Focuses. And before the event started, I was taking some, I think it was some Castrol or BP guests round inside the stadium, and I managed to lose it slightly and hit one of the barriers in the stadium and broke the suspension. So I had to limp out of the stadium onto the car park and tell the boys that I'd damaged this suspension during a passenger ride. So that wasn't my finest hour, guys, to be honest.
Brilliant. So Matt, have you got a question for our next guest? It can be anything it can be absolutely anything.
Do we know who the next guest is?
Not
That
yet.
was the point.
Not yet. No.
Oh, okay.
When you're a rally driver, you're used to this blind conversation where you just got to have some faith in
Yeah.
I'm trying to think. Probably something like if they could drive any car from any era on any stage or circuit, what would it be?
Yeah. Perfect. Great. That's brilliant. Perfect.
Before Guy hits the stop button on the record, I have to tell you, if you're listening to this at iTunes or wherever you download your podcast, you can also watch it on YouTube. And you definitely need to on this occasion, because Matt had watched a couple of these episodes previously and noticed that Guy had a rather nice grey trophy cabinet behind him. And he made sure that his trophy cabinet was just as grey, just as nice, but has a few more trophies.
Yeah.
It was trophy top trumps, wasn't it? And trouble is, though, the difference is all guys are probably won by him. These definitely all weren't won by me.
I'll have to pull out a few of the old plastic karting ones and try and. Well, Matt, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It's been great, and great catch up with you. Obviously, we wish you the best of luck. You've got Kyle Army coming up shortly with the Bentley, so want to give that a good end to the season. Obviously winning in Bathurst beginning of the year. Let's try and end the season with a win as well. So we look forward to that, and hopefully see you on the rally stage again soon, and maybe going for that BRC championship down the line. So thanks once again, and really enjoyed catching up.
No problem at all, and thank you very much both. And we need to try and it'd be nice to bookend the year. If we've won at the start of the year in Bathurst, if we win at the end, that would be brilliant. And you never know. BRC might be something around the corner, so you never say never.